He saved the princess with his own body. The queen refuses to let him go. Marcus had always been a man of action. A skilled warrior from a distant world, he was known across galaxies for his bravery and strength. His reputation was built on missions of rescue, battles fought, and lives saved. But when he received the message from the kingdom of Zalora, he had no idea how much this mission would change his life. The princess, Zarya, was the beloved daughter of Queen Rhyana and King Helger. She had been captured by a cruel warlord who had taken her to his fortress on a distant, uncharted planet. Her captors were merciless, and the royal family was desperate. Marcus had been offered a vast reward for her safe return, but he knew the cost of this mission would be far greater than any reward. It wasn't just a matter of money or fame. This mission would demand everything of him. When he arrived on the warlord's planet, he quickly realized that the rescue would not be easy. The fortress was heavily guarded, and the warlord was known for his cruelty. But Marcus was no stranger to danger. He had faced much worse in his lifetime, and this was just another challenge to overcome. He carefully infiltrated the fortress, using his skills to evade the guards and make his way deeper into the stronghold. As he reached the princess's cell, he felt a surge of determination. He had come here to save her, and he wasn't leaving without her. The moment he unlocked the door to her cell, he found her sitting on the floor, her face pale and tired, but her eyes full of hope. "You came for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus gave her a reassuring smile. "I'll get you out of here, princess. Stay close." But just as he reached out to help her to her feet, the fortress alarms blared, signaling that their presence had been discovered. The warlord's soldiers were closing in, and there was no time to waste. Marcus quickly guided Zarya through the dark hallways, the sounds of heavy boots echoing behind them. They barely managed to escape through a hidden passage, but as they reached the outer walls, they were confronted by the warlord's elite guards. It was in that moment, as the guards surrounded them, that Marcus made his decision. He couldn't leave the princess behind, not when she was so close to freedom. Without hesitation, he pushed her into a nearby alcove, shielding her from the incoming fire with his own body. Blaster shots hit him in the side, his armor denting with each impact. He winced in pain but didn't falter. He had made a promise and he wasn't about to break it. "Run!" he shouted to Zarya, his voice hoarse with pain. "Get to the ship!" But Zarya didn't move. Instead, she rushed to his side, her face filled with fear. "No, you can't stay here." "You'll die. I'll be fine," he said, his breath shallow. "Just go." Reluctantly, she turned and ran, not looking back. Marcus fought through the pain, using every ounce of strength he had to hold off the soldiers. But the battle was lost. The last thing he remembered before everything went black was the sound of footsteps fading away as Zarya escaped to safety. When Marcus awoke, he was lying on a soft bed in a luxurious room, his body bandaged and his wounds carefully tended to. He tried to move, but the pain was overwhelming. His head spun and he could barely keep his eyes open. He heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching, and when he opened his eyes, he saw a figure standing at the foot of the bed. It was Queen Rhyana, the ruler of Zalora. "Thank you for saving my daughter," she said softly, her voice calm but filled with gratitude. "You've given her a chance at life, and for that I will be forever in your debt." Marcus tried to speak, but his throat felt dry and his words came out in a rasp. "The princess, is she safe?" Rhyana smiled, though her expression was tinged with worry. "She is, thanks to you, but you are gravely injured. You must rest." Marcus nodded weakly, though his mind was racing. He had done what he came to do. The mission was a success. He had saved the princess, and now it was time for him to leave. But as the queen turned to leave the room, she paused. "You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice firm. Marcus frowned, his body stiffening despite the pain. "I didn't come here to stay. I came to save your daughter. Now I've done that. I need to return to my world." Queen Rhyana didn't turn to face him. "You're not well enough to leave yet, and besides, your actions have earned you a place here in our kingdom. I cannot allow you to leave before you've fully recovered." Marcus felt a surge of frustration. He had never been one to sit idle, and the thought of staying in a palace while recovering didn't sit well with him. He was a warrior, not a guest. "I don't need your pity," he said, his voice low and strained. The queen turned to face him then, her expression unreadable. "It is not pity, it is gratitude. You saved my daughter's life, and I intend to repay you for your sacrifice. I won't allow you to leave until you've healed." Marcus didn't know how to respond. He had no intention of staying, but he also knew that arguing with the queen was not something he could easily win. She was a powerful woman, and her influence extended far beyond her kingdom. Reluctantly, he nodded. "I'll stay until I'm healed, but once I'm able, I'm leaving." The queen's eyes softened, though there was a hint of something else in her gaze. "We'll see about that." As the days passed, Marcus remained in the royal palace, recovering from his wounds. The queen's insistence on keeping him there was constant, and despite his protests, he found himself spending more and more time in the company of Queen Riana and her daughter, Princess Zarya. He had expected to feel a sense of accomplishment after completing his mission, but instead, he felt trapped. Zarya visited him often, her presence a constant reminder of why he had come in the first place. She was kind and grateful, and her beauty was undeniable. But Marcus kept his distance, knowing that his place was not among royalty. He was just a soldier, a man who had done his duty, nothing more. But as the days went on, Marcus began to notice something. There was a subtle shift in the way the queen looked at him. Her gratitude seemed to evolve into something deeper, something more complex. He couldn't help but feel the weight of her gaze whenever she was near him. Still, Marcus remained focused on his goal. He was a warrior, not a prince. His duty was to protect, not to be entangled in the politics of a royal court. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to convince himself, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was becoming a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. Marcus had expected the healing process to be quick. After all, he had survived much worse injuries in the past, but this was different. The queen's insistence that he stay in the palace until he fully recovered felt like an unspoken command. It was more than just a request. It was a demand wrapped in gratitude. No matter how many times he tried to argue, the queen's words always held the power to silence him. "You cannot leave yet," she said each time, her voice calm but firm. "Not until you're strong enough to stand on your own." Marcus had never been one to feel trapped. His life had been filled with missions that pushed him to his limits, and he had always found a way to escape danger. But this time, he couldn't escape the walls of the royal palace. He had been a prisoner in his own body, weakened and vulnerable, dependent on the kindness of strangers who now felt more like captors than allies. The days bled together. Marcus spent most of his time in his chambers, trying to rest and heal, but his mind raced with thoughts of his mission. He had come here to rescue the princess, and he had succeeded. But now that the mission was over, he didn't know what his place was. Was he supposed to stay and become a part of this royal family? Did they expect more from him? More than just a warrior who had done his duty? One afternoon, as Marcus sat by the window, his thoughts were interrupted by the soft knock on the door. He looked up to see Princess Zarya standing in the doorway, her face lit up with a smile. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice gentle. Marcus nodded and gestured for her to enter. Zarya stepped into the room, her presence calming. The princess had visited him often since his recovery had begun, and each time she seemed more relaxed, more comfortable in his presence. She was kind and generous, and her smile always made Marcus feel like he was doing the right thing by staying. "I brought you something," she said, holding out a small package wrapped in delicate paper. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Just a little gift," she replied, her cheeks coloring slightly. "To thank you for saving my life." He took the package from her and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small, intricately carved figurine depicting a warrior holding a sword. It was beautifully made, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as he held it in his hands. "It's beautiful," he said, glancing up at her. Zarya smiled softly. "It's from our kingdom's artisan. I thought it might remind you of your courage." Marcus nodded, but there was a part of him that felt conflicted. He had done what he had to do. He hadn't rescued her for any reward or recognition. It was just his duty. And yet here she was, giving him a gift as if he were something more than just a soldier who did his job. "I didn't do it for gifts," Marcus said, his voice low. "I know," Zarya said quietly, her expression softening, "but I still want to thank you. You gave up everything for me. I can never repay you for that." "You don't have to," Marcus replied, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "It was my choice." There was a long pause, and Zarya seemed to study him carefully, as if searching for something in his eyes. Finally, she spoke again. "Do you ever wonder what you're meant to do next?" she asked softly. Marcus was taken aback by the question. It was one he hadn't thought about much since he had arrived. He had been so focused on the mission, and the fight that he hadn't considered what his life would be like after the princess was safe. But now, as he looked at Zarya, he felt an unsettling uncertainty settle in his chest. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought I was here to save you, and I did, but now I feel like I'm stuck." Zarya's gaze softened with understanding. "I know how you feel. My life was planned for me long before I was born. I was always going to be queen, always going to be bound by duty. But now, after all that's happened, I wonder if I'm meant for something more, something different." Marcus couldn't help but notice the sadness in her eyes. The princess, despite her royal status, seemed burdened by expectations and the weight of her future. It was a feeling he understood all too well. His entire life had been shaped by duty and responsibility. He had never been able to choose his path had always been chosen for him. "Maybe we're both looking for something," Marcus said, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe we're both trying to find a way to live outside of what others expect of us." Zarya looked at him with a quiet intensity. "Do you think it's possible to find a different way?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure. He had spent so much of his life following orders and doing what was expected that the idea of breaking free from that pattern seemed impossible. But the thought lingered in his mind. What would it be like to live a life where he wasn't just a tool for others to use? To have the freedom to make his own choices. "I don't know," Marcus said finally, his gaze distant. "But maybe we can find out together." Zarya smiled, a small but genuine smile, and for the first time since his arrival, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the trap he had found himself in. But before they could say anything more, the door opened, and Queen Ryana entered the room. Her presence was commanding, and she immediately caught sight of the two of them standing close together. Zarya stepped back slightly, her expression guarded. "I see you're feeling better," Queen Ryana said, her voice smooth but with an edge of authority. Marcus straightened, but there was a weight to his words when he replied, "I'm recovering, Your Majesty." The Queen's gaze lingered on him, then shifted to Zarya. "I hope you're not keeping him from his rest, daughter. The warrior needs all the strength he can get." Zarya quickly shook her head. "No, mother, I was just talking to him." The Queen nodded, but Marcus noticed a slight tension in her posture, a subtle sign of possessiveness. It was as if she was guarding something, not just her daughter, but something else, something she wasn't willing to reveal. "You must understand, Marcus," the Queen said, her tone turning more serious. "You are not just any warrior, you are now a part of our family, and with that comes responsibility. You cannot leave until you've fully recovered. And once you are well, we will discuss how you will serve this kingdom." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew better than to defy the Queen, not when he was still weak and vulnerable. But he also knew one thing: he couldn't stay forever. "I understand, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady. The Queen smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "Good, we will need you, Marcus. You're not just a hero, you are the protector of this kingdom now." Marcus's heart sank as he realized that the Queen's gratitude might come at a much higher price than he was willing to pay. The days grew longer, and Marcus found himself growing more and more restless. Each morning, he awoke in the grand palace, surrounded by luxury and comfort. He had never been used to such wealth and extravagance. His life had always been about survival, about missions where every moment mattered, where danger was ever present. Here, in the palace, the silence of the grand halls was both comforting and suffocating. He was trapped in a world where he didn't belong, a world of politeness, formality, and expectations. Despite his discomfort, Marcus couldn't deny that the princess, Zarya, was a pleasant presence. They had spent more time together as he healed. She would visit him in his chambers, sometimes bringing books or small trinkets as gifts. Her kindness was genuine, and though Marcus had always kept his distance from royalty, something about Zarya made it hard to stay distant. Her conversations were easy, and she often shared stories about her life before the palace, times when she was free, before the weight of her future caught up with her. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the gardens, Zarya sat beside Marcus in the palace's courtyard. They were surrounded by flowers of every color, their fragrance mixing with the warm air. The sound of distant birds filled the silence, and for a brief moment Marcus almost felt at peace. "You know, I never imagined life could be so simple," Zarya said softly, breaking the silence. "I've spent so much of my life preparing to be queen that I never considered what it would be like to just live." Marcus glanced at her. Isn't that what everyone wants? A life of peace? Zarya shook her head slowly, her long hair catching the light. Maybe. But I don't know if I'm ready for that. I've spent so many years learning the rules, the politics, the strategy. Now that I'm here, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. I thought I wanted to rule, but sometimes I feel like I'm trapped in a cage. Marcus watched her closely, sensing the deep sorrow in her words. He understood that feeling all too well, the burden of expectations, the pressure to be something you didn't choose. But he also knew that it wasn't something easily shaken off. "You're the princess," he said. "You're meant to lead your people." "I don't want to lead anymore," she whispered, looking away. "I want to be free. I want to have the choice to live my life." Marcus felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was trapped by her own destiny, just as he had been by his. He had always known his path: warrior, soldier, protector. But for Zarya, everything had been decided for her from the day she was born. She had no freedom, no choice. She was bound to her royal duties, to the people of her kingdom, to a future she couldn't control. "You don't have to do this alone," Marcus said, his voice soft but steady. Zarya met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sadness. "I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am anymore." Before Marcus could respond, a sharp voice interrupted them. It was Queen Rihanna, her presence unmistakable as she approached, her robes trailing behind her like a shadow. "You should be resting, Marcus," the queen said, her tone cold, though not unkind. She turned her gaze toward her daughter, a hint of concern in her eyes. "And you, Zarya, have you forgotten your duties? There are matters to attend to." Zarya's face flushed, but she stood up, quickly brushing herself off. "Of course, mother, I'll be there in a moment." Marcus watched as the princess walked away, leaving him alone with the queen. There was an air of tension between them now, something unspoken but palpable. The queen's eyes narrowed as she turned her gaze to him. "You've become quite close with my daughter, Marcus," Queen Rihanna said, her voice smooth, but there was an underlying edge to it. "I trust you understand the importance of maintaining a certain distance." Marcus stood, feeling the weight of her words. He wasn't sure what the queen meant, but he didn't like the way she said them. There was something possessive in her tone, something that made him uneasy. "I don't intend to get in the way of your family's plans," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I'm just here to recover, nothing more." The queen studied him for a moment before speaking again, her tone softer. "You misunderstand, Marcus. You're more than just a guest here. You've saved my daughter's life, and I owe you a debt. You will stay here as long as it takes for you to recover, and once you are well, I expect you to serve this kingdom." Marcus stiffened, his eyes narrowing. He had been expecting this. The queen's gratitude, while genuine, had a price. "Serve?" he asked, his voice low. "How?" "You will help us protect our kingdom," the queen replied. "You've proven yourself capable in combat. The warlords who threaten us won't stop at anything. We need your skills." Marcus's stomach twisted. He had come here to rescue Zarya, but now it seemed as if he had become a pawn in a much larger game. He wasn't sure what the queen's plans were, but he wasn't going to be used again. He had his own path to follow. "I'm not a soldier for hire," Marcus said, his voice steady, though frustration bubbled beneath the surface. "I'm a warrior with a purpose. I don't fight for kingdoms, I fight for people." The queen's eyes hardened, but she didn't raise her voice. Instead, she stepped closer to him, her presence imposing. "You've made a grave mistake, Marcus," she said quietly, her voice dripping with a quiet authority. "You think you can leave, that you can walk away from this, but you are bound to us now. I will make sure of it." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard the queen's words, but it was the look in her eyes that truly unsettled him. There was something dangerous about her, something that made him realize that leaving the palace wasn't going to be as easy as he had hoped. "I'm not your pawn," Marcus said firmly. The queen's lips curved into a smile, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We shall see." Marcus spent the following days in a state of confusion. The tension between him and the queen grew, and his frustration with the situation only deepened. The queen's constant demands, her expectations, and the mounting pressure to stay and fight for her kingdom left him feeling suffocated. He spent more time with Zarya, though his connection with her grew more complicated with every passing day. She seemed to be caught between the same feelings of duty and the desire for freedom that plagued him. She wanted to live a life where she could make her own choices, but she couldn't, and neither could he. One evening, as the two of them walked through the palace gardens, Marcus couldn't help but ask the question that had been on his mind for days. "Do you think it's possible to escape all of this?" he asked, his voice quiet. Zarya stopped, looking out at the setting sun. "Escape?" she echoed. I wish it were that simple. Marcus stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. Maybe we can figure it out together. Maybe we can leave this place behind. Zarya turned to face him, her eyes searching his for a moment. And for the first time, Marcus saw something in her eyes, something that looked like hope. The tension in the palace had reached a breaking point. Marcus had spent weeks recovering, but each day that passed made him feel more and more like a prisoner. The queen's expectations were clear. He was no longer just a warrior who had saved the princess. Now, he was a tool, a weapon to be used in the queen's political games. And as much as Marcus tried to ignore it, the weight of his position grew heavier with each passing day. The Queen Rhianna, had made it clear that he was to stay in the palace, to rest and heal until he was ready to serve the kingdom. But every time she spoke of it, Marcus's sense of freedom slipped further away. He had come here to do one thing, rescue the princess. That was all. But now it seemed like his mission had become something much more complicated, something he hadn't signed up for. Zarya, the princess, had noticed it too. Her once bright, hopeful eyes now seemed clouded with worry. She was torn between the love and gratitude she felt for Marcus and the realization that her mother's demands were shaping both of their futures. Marcus had spent countless hours with Zarya, talking, walking through the gardens, and sharing stories. But no matter how much time they spent together, Marcus couldn't escape the feeling that something was missing. He wasn't meant to stay here forever. He wasn't meant to be a pawn in the Queen's grand plans. One afternoon, as Marcus was walking alone through the halls of the palace, he found himself at a crossroads. He had just come from a meeting with the Queen, who had once again insisted that he remain in the kingdom and train the royal guard. It was a job he didn't want, one he didn't need. But the Queen's words had left him feeling trapped. She had hinted once again that his departure was not an option. "I'll never be your soldier," Marcus muttered to himself as he walked, his fist clenched tightly at his side. "I'm a warrior, not a servant." As he made his way toward the training courtyard, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to find Zarya walking toward him, her expression unreadable. "Marcus," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of concern. "I've been looking for you." He nodded, though his heart felt heavy. "I'm here. What's wrong?" Zarya hesitated before speaking. "I know what you've been thinking. I know that you don't want to stay here, that you feel like a prisoner." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't realized how obvious his frustration had become, but Zarya had always been perceptive, always able to see through the walls he put up. "I don't belong here," Marcus admitted, his voice low. "I'm not meant to be a part of this world, Zarya. I came here to save you, and now that I've done that, I don't know what to do. I don't want to fight for your kingdom to be another soldier for your mother's games." Zarya's face softened, and she stepped closer to him. "I understand," she said quietly. "I've been feeling the same way. I never asked for this life. I never asked to be a princess, to have my future decided before I was born. I never wanted to be trapped in a cage." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders just by sharing his feelings with her. But even as he spoke, he knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There were forces at play far beyond their control. "I want to leave," he said, his voice steady. "I want to leave this place to find my own path. I don't know what that looks like, but I can't stay here. I can't stay and be used." Zarya's gaze shifted to the ground. "I wish I could leave with you," she whispered. "But I can't. I'm the princess. I have responsibilities. I have a duty to my people." Marcus reached out, gently lifting her chin so that she looked him in the eyes. "You don't have to carry this burden alone," he said. "You don't have to stay here just because it's what's expected of you. You have a choice, just like I do." Zarya's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment Marcus thought she might cry, but instead she wiped her eyes and took a step back. "I'm trapped," she said, her voice breaking. "We're both trapped. I can't just run away from my responsibilities. But I can't keep pretending that this is what I want. I don't want to be stuck in this palace forever, just another pawn in a game I didn't choose." Marcus's heart ached for her. He knew what it was like to feel trapped by duty, by expectations. But he also knew that there had to be another way. There had to be a way for both of them to escape, to find freedom. "We can figure it out together," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I'm not going to let you be a prisoner here, Zarya. And I'm not going to stay if it means becoming part of your mother's plan." Zarya looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for some sign of hope. "But what can we do? The Queen won't let either of us go. She'll make sure we stay here. Marcus's mind raced. He had been thinking about it for days, and now, more than ever, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't let Zarya be held captive by her mother's control, and he couldn't stay here, trapped in a life that wasn't his own. "We need to leave," he said, his voice strong and filled with purpose. "We need to escape this place. We can't stay here waiting for the Queen's permission. If we leave now, we have a chance." Zarya's eyes widened in surprise. "But how? The palace is heavily guarded." "The Queen will send soldiers after us." "We'll be ready," Marcus said. "I've learned everything I need to know about this place. We can make it. We can leave before anyone even realizes what's happening." Zarya hesitated, fear in her eyes, but then she nodded. "Okay. I'll go with you." Marcus took her hand, feeling the weight of the decision they were making. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be without consequences. But for the first time since he had arrived, he felt like he had a purpose. He wasn't just a soldier for someone else's war. He was fighting for his own freedom and for Zarya's too. "We'll do it," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Together." The plan was set into motion. That night, under the cover of darkness, Marcus and Zarya made their escape. It was risky, dangerous, but they both knew it was their only chance. They slipped out of the palace, moving quietly through the dark corridors. Every step felt like it was taking them closer to freedom, but also further away from everything they had known. The moonlight shone down on them as they reached the outer gates, but just as they were about to slip past the last set of guards, a figure appeared in the shadows. It was Queen Rayana. "I knew you'd try to leave," she said, her voice cold. "But you can't escape from me, Marcus. Or from this kingdom." The moonlight cast long shadows over the palace as Marcus and Zarya stood frozen in the middle of the courtyard. The Queen's voice echoed in the cold night air, her words sharp and full of authority. "I knew you would try to leave," Queen Rayana said, her eyes cold and calculating. "But you can't escape from me, Marcus, or from this kingdom." Zarya stepped closer to Marcus, her hand gripping his tightly, her face a mix of fear and defiance. "We're not your prisoners anymore," she said, her voice trembling but strong. The Queen's gaze flickered toward Zarya, a flicker of emotion passing across her face, but it was quickly masked by her regal composure. "You think you can run away from your destiny, Zarya? You are the future of this kingdom. You cannot simply walk away from everything." Marcus stepped in front of her, standing tall and firm. "She's not a pawn in your game, Queen Rayana. She has a choice just like anyone else, and I won't let you trap her here." The Queen took a step forward, her expression hardening. "You think you can just take her from me? She's my daughter. She belongs here with me." "I don't belong to anyone," Zarya said, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. "I'm not your possession, Mother. I'm not anyone's possession. I have the right to make my own choices." Marcus looked back at her, a hint of pride in his eyes. Her words were full of strength, and for the first time he saw the real Zarya, the woman who would no longer be controlled by her mother's ambitions. The Queen's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Zarya. You don't understand the consequences of this. I've protected you, guided you, made sure you were prepared for the responsibilities of ruling. And now you want to throw it all away for this man." Marcus felt a flash of anger, but he kept his voice steady. "We're not asking for your permission, Queen Rayana. This isn't about your kingdom or your rules. This is about freedom. Zarya has the right to live her life as she chooses, just like I do." The Queen's eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment Marcus thought she might lash out. But she remained calm, her gaze calculating. "You think running away will change anything? You'll never be free. Not from me, and not from the forces that will chase you once you leave." "We'll face those challenges together," Zarya said, standing tall beside Marcus. "But I'm not going to be controlled anymore. I'm done with being a puppet on strings." The Queen's silence was deafening. For a long moment, she simply watched them, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the palace. Marcus and Zarya stood in the courtyard, the air thick with tension. They had made their choice, and there was no turning back now. "We have to go," Marcus said, his voice low. "We can't waste any more time." Zarya nodded, but there was a look in her eyes that made Marcus pause. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "Once we leave, we can't come back. There's no going back to the way things were." Marcus took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "There's no future for us here, Zarya, not if we stay and let her control us. We can make our own future, together." Zarya hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You're right, let's go." They turned and ran, their footsteps echoing in the quiet night as they made their way through the palace gates. The guards would soon notice their absence, but by then it would be too late. They were already on their way. The journey ahead would be difficult. They didn't know where they would go or what they would face, but for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a sense of hope. He wasn't running from something anymore. He was running toward something, a future where he could make his own choices and where Zarya could do the same. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk. Days passed as they traveled through the wilderness, away from the palace and the life they had known. There were moments of fear, moments when they weren't sure if they were doing the right thing. But every step they took felt like freedom. They faced challenges, obstacles that tested their resolve, but each challenge brought them closer together. They shared stories, dreams, and fears as they moved forward, always side by side. Marcus had never imagined a life like this. He had always been a soldier, a man defined by his duty to others. But now he was something more. He was free. And for the first time, he felt like he was living for himself. Zarya, too, found a sense of peace she had never known. She had spent her entire life preparing for a future she didn't want, but now she was free to make her own choices. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt hopeful. As they made their way across the land, Marcus and Zarya encountered people who lived in the shadows of the kingdom, people who had escaped the queen's rule and forged their own paths. They found allies in the most unlikely places, and with every new friend they made, their belief in the possibility of a better future grew stronger. But even as they moved further away from the palace, they knew that the queen would not stop looking for them. She would send soldiers after them, send spies to track their movements. But Marcus was ready for whatever came next. He had been a soldier his entire life, and he would fight to protect what they had built. He wouldn't let anyone take away the freedom he and Zarya had found. They didn't know what the future held, but they were no longer afraid. They had each other, and that was enough. One evening, as they camped under the stars, Zarya looked at Marcus with a sense of quiet determination in her eyes. "I think we're going to be okay," she said softly. Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I know we are." They sat in silence, the night air cool and peaceful around them. They had come so far, and yet this was just the beginning. They were free, and nothing could take that away from them. The road ahead was uncertain, but as long as they had each other, they knew they could face whatever challenges came their way. Together, they would build a future of their own making, free from the control of those who sought to dictate their lives.